back like we never left. It's Double Move Sports. As always, I'm Stef Albiero. I'm here with the fantasy phenom, my guy, the man crushing it right now with the NFL mock draft rookie content on the channel, Alex Lotz. I'm hyped, man. This is a crazy time of the season. It's like the calm before the storm. We got free agency coming up, and it's all going to crescendo on draft day in April. People are going nuts over this Travis Etienne 40 time and weigh-in, man. But what's up with you?
Dude, I'm excited. I mean, I can tell you're super hyped for the draft. I am too. But like before that, we got free agency. At the time of this recording, we are mere days out. By the time you're listening, maybe free agency has already started. And the names in free agency just go on and on. There's quarterbacks, there's running backs, there's receivers, tight ends. If you're even thinking outside of fantasy football, tons of good defensive players as well. It's going to be absolutely nuts. I think we're going to see some trades. We're going to start to get some of the rookie hype as well that you're talking about. So it's a fun time of year. The biggest dead period of the offseason hopefully is over, and we will finally start getting into some action. So I'm super hyped. I just made a Dynasty trade right before we started recording. Picked up my boy Carson Wentz as a Colts fan. Had to get in on that hype train before it was too late. Might have overpaid. Don't want to talk about what I gave up for him, but I got him. So let's roll.
Hey, get your guy. Get your guy.
100%.
I don't hate it. And we're talking about trades. Let's jump into our first topic of today's show. Let's rate this trade. Came through on Twitter at Double Move Sport. Our guy Can't Guard Jimmy on Twitter said, just traded Brandon Aiyuk, the 112 and the 312 for A.J. Brown in a non-Superflex Dynasty League. He says, I think that's a win. What do you guys think? Alex, I'll have you go first on this one.
You know, I think this is actually a pretty fair trade. To me, it comes down to where is your team? You always want to pick a side, right? Are you contending or are you rebuilding? But to me, I honestly would take the A.J. Brown side. I understand why you would take the Aiyuk side if you're rebuilding and you want more assets. You want to turn one stud wide receiver into potentially two and have a flyer dart throw. But to me, I'm taking the A.J. Brown side. And, like, he's 9 months older than Aiyuk. So I don't want to hear anything about age. They're essentially the same age. And he has 2 years.
9 months matters, man. 9 months matters.
I don't know if it does. Sure, it matters, but ever so slightly. You know what I mean? Like, it matters, but it's splitting
it
definitely
hairs. Matters way more for running backs when they're going to hit that second contract, right? You're like Najee Harris. You're going to be like, if he goes Najee in the first round, he's going to be like 28 when he hits free agency.
For a wide receiver, not as big of a deal, especially this early in their career. So to me, A.J. Brown's only 9 months older than Aiyuk. He has 2 seasons of proven production, and he's tied to a good quarterback. He's the clear number one option in his offense. With Brandon Aiyuk, we saw a lot of flashes last season. He was fantastic. And actually, if you break it down and look at points per game, he did miss some time. He was wide receiver 18 in full PPR and points per game as a rookie with no quarterback continuity on the San Francisco 49ers. So this isn't an indictment to Brandon Aiyuk at all. I think he's a fine player, but we just haven't seen as big of a sample size. We haven't seen him take over as this alpha kind of wide receiver one that we have seen from A.J. Brown. So to me, this really comes down to proven production versus potential upside. And the reason I would take the A.J. Brown side is because I want that proven. Like, to me, A.J. Brown's a top 5 dynasty wide receiver. So I want that. Yes, Brandon Aiyuk is probably somewhere in the top 20. I don't have it up in front of me right now. Probably somewhere from 15 to 20 with his production that he had as a rookie and his age and his potential. But that 112, like, you could swing and miss on the 112. Brandon Aiyuk is still a very small sample size as well. We don't know what the 49ers are going to look like moving forward. We haven't really seen that offense with the running backs healthy, with George Kittle and Debo and Aiyuk healthy. So I don't know. He could be the third option in the offense in the passing game with a bad quarterback. So to me, I'm taking the proven production. Yes, the 112 is enticing, but guys bust all the time, even in the first round of dynasty rookie drafts. I mean, you look at the last several seasons, every year there's consensus first round talent that busts several. I mean, I'm going to go down the past 4 seasons, not 2020 because it's too early to tell with some of those guys, but 2019, Dwayne Haskins, N'Keal Harry, Paris Campbell, Drew Lock, all first round guys. 2018, Darius Geis, Rashad Penny, Josh Rosen, Sam Darnold. 2017, Mike Williams, O.J. Howard, John Ross. These were all guys going in the first round. 2016, Laquan Treadwell, Josh Doxson, Corey Coleman. So
yikes.
Every single season, just because it's a first-round pick, especially here at the 112, there is no guarantee that that guy is going to hit. You could end up giving up A.J. Brown, a 23-year-old absolute stud who's going to be a top 15 fantasy football wide receiver year in and year out for the next probably five seasons, we would say, if we had a crystal ball, for a guy who could be a solid wide receiver too in Brandon Aiyuk, and a risk on some upside in the draft. So I'm taking the proven production, and that's what it comes down to for me. If you want to take Aiyuk in the 112, I get it. I see the upside. I actually think it's a fairly even trade, but I'm one of those guys in Dynasty. Like we were debating this earlier this week, Steph, Michael Thomas or the 104, which is probably going to be Jamar Chase in our league. And I'm like, oh, on one side you could say this is Jamar Chase, the clear number one receiver in this class, young, 5-6 years younger than Michael Thomas. But to me, I'm like, I want the proven production of Michael Thomas. So it all depends where the team is, but give me the guy who you know what you're getting, in A.J. Brown.
It's fair. I lean the Aiyuk side, and I'm in the same boat as you. I have A.J. Brown as a top 5 Dynasty wide receiver right now, but this is just a classic wide receiver sell high. I mean, if my kind of rule of thumb is and there's a lot of guys that talk about this too, if you see a wide receiver in someone's like top 3, or they're on Twitter saying this is the Dynasty wide receiver 1, that means it's time to sell. Because the gap between A.J. Brown and a lot of other receivers, including Brandon Aiyuk, purely from just fantasy points, what's the gap between them? It was 2.2 fantasy points per game on the entire season in 2020. That's with Aiyuk as a rookie, A.J. Brown as in his second year. And if we look at the last half of the season, weeks 8 through 16, when Aiyuk was fully ingrained in the offense as the go-to X-wide receiver on the 49ers, even with Nick Mullins there, we saw Aiyuk making explosive plays. Deebo Samuel was kind of relegated to this guy who's used near the line of scrimmage, kind of almost, I'm not going to say gadget player, but he was running more jet sweeps. They were trying to get him the ball in some creative ways. Brandon Aiyuk was the true alpha X on the outside, and those weeks at the end of the season, Aiyuk 18.6 fantasy points per game, A.J. Brown 15.1 fantasy points per game in PPR league. So to me, the gap really isn't that big at the end of the day. We could talk about the 9 months difference there. I really don't think that matters, but there's so many good wide receivers in the NFL for fantasy football. There's just so much depth, and the variance between points per game finishes for wide receivers just isn't that large. So for me, it's like, why not make a somewhat lateral move, get 2 valuable trade assets at the 112 in a non-superflex rookie draft? You're still able to get names like Trevor Lawrence, Terrace Marshall, Kenny Gainwell, Justin Fields, Chuba Hubbard, Jamar Jefferson. Those are guys that I think have a lot of upside. Depending on who gets the draft capital, could be really appealing. And at the 312, there's some dart throws that I'd like to make. My kind of philosophy with the third round is let's just go volume there, or let's use that as a trade asset to move up and get my guy when we're actually on the clock. But names there would be like Kyle Trask. I think Javian Hawkins is an interesting player at the next level. Brevin Jordan, a tight end that a lot of people are high on. Those are guys that could be there back of the third round in a rookie draft. So I don't mind it, man. I like getting rookie picks. I just think there's so much you can do with those. And this is the time when, they're going at peak value. So, look, I'm not going to debate too hard one way or the other. I do lean the Aiyuk side, but A.J. Brown's an absolute stud. I just think I'm higher on Aiyuk than you are.
Yeah, and I like Aiyuk. I really do. To me, though, I just think the 12-game sample size we saw from Aiyuk when the team is going to be different next year moving forward is tough to trust. I just think the range of outcomes is a lot bigger. The bottom could fall out for Aiyuk. The upside, I don't think, is as high for Aiyuk as it is for A.J. Brown. So from that perspective, the floor is lower, the ceiling is lower. So I'm taking the A.J. Brown side. Yes, range of outcomes, they're probably going to come in somewhere in the middle. You said that 2.2 fantasy points per game on the season last year. And if it's 2.2 fantasy points a game for the next 5 years, then yeah, maybe if you can turn that 112 into someone that's going to be productive, maybe at the running back position, that could be worth it. But chances are, in my opinion, that A.J. Brown's ceiling continues to climb higher. Aiyuk's does as well, but I just think that floor is there. So, I want to avoid the bottom falling out. And to me, in a non-superflex, the 112 isn't really enough to get me excited. Yes, you can always hit on those guys. There's like at the 112, you're probably looking at a day 2 wide receiver. You know what I'm saying? Or a round 3 running back. So the hit rate on those guys just isn't high enough for me to give up someone like A.J. Brown. That's where I'm at. But I think we're both in agreement that depends where your team's at as well.
100%. 100%. And that's always the tricky thing when we look at trades like on Twitter in a vacuum and people get into vicious debates back and forth and the census moves from one way to the other. I mean, I was talking about this with a bunch of guys earlier. It's like we're all going to crap on A.J. Dillon. And on Twitter right now, people have him down in the dumps. But the second A.J. Dillon has a good first half to start the 2021 season, people are going to say, oh, he's a Dynasty RB1, buy him right now. Like the pendulum's going to swing so far.
Just stay off Twitter. That's our biggest advice of the day. Just stay off Twitter. Come on.
Use it as one small data point in a much larger ingestion of overall data points. But let's talk about another question in rookie drafts, in non-superflex leagues. You're at the 101. The question came up, who are you taking there? In a PPR league, assuming there's no pressing need on your roster, in a vacuum, are you going to go Najee Harris or Jamar Chase at the 101 in non-superflex today?
Yeah, this one's pretty easy for me if I had to choose between the two, and I think it's going to be for you as well. It's Najee Harris. Jamar Chase is awesome. I think he could be a top 12, a fantasy wide receiver 1 for years to come, but this just comes down to scarcity, and we find it in redraft every single season. There's never enough running backs to go around. It's like musical chairs. And so you want to, especially in Dynasty, I mean, in all the Dynasty leagues I'm in, every single team is just grasping at straws for running backs, and no one has them. And the two teams that have them are asking for King's ransom. Unfortunately, you're one of those two teams, so screw you for that. But you got to get the running back. You got to get where the value is. Running backs are more valuable. Najee Harris's talent is there as well. So, yeah, in a vacuum right now in March, I'm taking Najee Harris. But it's honestly almost not even worth the debate until we see landing spots, because what if Jamar Chase goes to the Cincinnati Bengals and Najee Harris ends up, as a day 2 pick and goes to a team where he might be sharing some of the work? That changes this question. So to me, it's Najee Harris, but that could end up being Travis Etienne. He could get into the conversation as the number 1 non-superflex pick in this draft if the draft capital is there, if the landing spot is there. So there's just so many variables still up in the air. But high level, I'm taking Najee Harris because I want the running back. But let's keep an eye out. Let's see the landing spot. Let's see the draft capital, because I think that is really, really important. And the thing is, I was looking at this earlier today when I was kind of putting together my notes, and I'm looking at these landing spots for the running backs. And unless some team that just doesn't need a running back decides to take one, unless like the Eagles take a running back, unless, the Panthers or just someone where it would make no sense. They have a guy under contract, potentially a long-term deal. Unless one of these teams takes a running back, like it's just not going to make sense for Najee Harris or Etienne to be in a quote-unquote bad situation, because there are so many situations when I look at these NFL teams that would be fantastic landing spots for the rookies. You can just go on down this list. I think the Bills would be a decent spot. You got the Miami Dolphins, depending on what happens in free agency. Even the Patriots, the Jets. The Jets could be a workhorse situation, even though the team's not as good. You got the Steelers. You got the Falcons. You got Seattle. The 49ers, Raheem Mostert's getting older. So even the 49ers, if the landing spot is there, maybe the value's not as high this year. But imagine like Najee Harris in a year in the Kyle Shanahan run scheme offense. Like how sick would that be? So there's more good landing spots than bad landing spots for these running backs. But you still have to just keep that in the back of your mind. And it's tough to talk about in March before we even see these free agents land either.
I think I'm with you on everything there. I think Najee is the most situation-proof prospect that we have coming into this draft class amongst all positions, man. Teams know what they're going to get with Najee Harris.
Mm-hmm.
A 230-pound specimen with soft hands, like, you know exactly the role that he's going to play on an offense. Yes, he's a little bit older. That's probably the one knock on Najee. But that doesn't concern me at all in a dynasty league. I'm looking at a 3-year window at absolute max. There's very few truly horrible situations in the NFL for Najee Harris next season. And the scarcity, right? That's running back's the most coveted position in fantasy, especially in a 1 QB league. If you hit on the next 3-down workhorse, like a Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley, you have a league winner. Even if you're in a total rebuild, If you're a contender, even better. And if you are in a rebuild, you can sell him for a massive haul if he has a good season. Look at guys like Jonathan Taylor and Cam Akers that shot up these draft boards. You can get hauls for these guys now if they have a good year, and then just continue to build around as a cornerstone asset if you want to keep Harris on the roster. So I'm with you. It sounds like we're both in agreement. We're both running back guys. I know for a lot of people in Dynasty leagues, they go with wide receivers because they do tend to be a little bit safer. But look, we're trying to win championships. We're not trying to just, as they say, we're not trying to have a what is it? Shit. we want to have a good time, not a long time when it comes to these Dynasty leagues. So I'd rather take a championship over being competitive for 3 years. Now let's talk about some actual news of the few little tidbits that we're starting to get as we head into free agency. We've seen some franchise tag moves. We've seen some re-signings. And one of those re-signings has been Gus Edwards, running back for the Baltimore Ravens. He has been placed under a restricted free agent tender. Sounds like they're working on a deal right now. But let's talk about not only Gus Edwards, but JK Dobbins for 2021 and beyond, because I'm seeing some takes on Twitter that are pretty spicy. Our guy Rob Norton, shout out to Rob. Love everything he does for this community, for charity, rallying the troops to get behind good causes. But Rob Norton said he sees 2021 Dobbins as 2020 Josh Jacobs, a guy that's going to get overhyped all offseason, guys that have good talent, but he's not in. I wanted to, at some point, we're going to have Rob on the show. We can go toe-to-toe as far as the debate. But as far as JK Dobbins, a question I want to throw out to you and kind of food for thought for everybody. Do we feel the same way about JK Dobbins, right? Is this RB1, super high upside, if Mark Ingram wasn't the RB12 in 2019? For a lot of folks, they say, look, Dobbins is just going to slide into that Mark Ingram role. I agree, but I think Dobbins can do a lot more than 2019 Mark Ingram.
I mean, I like Rob as well. We've been in a lot of his charity leagues and things like that, and it will be fun to have him on the show. But if he was fading Josh Jacobs heading into last season, he missed. Josh Jacobs was RB8 last year. So, I don't understand that comparison too much, because if he's lower than consensus, I don't know a lot of people that had Josh Jacobs higher than running back 8, and that's where he finished. So I know the stigma, both Josh Jacobs and Ezekiel Elliott, people think they sucked last year. They were actually top 10 backs. No, it's not this flashy, big game, burst game production, but it's just being steady, being consistent, and scoring a lot of touchdowns. So I actually like the comp in terms of what they can potentially do in the field, but if we're comparing Dobbins to Jacobs last year, we're saying Dobbins might actually outperform his ADP. So to your point, Gus Edwards, I think it was a second-round tender that was placed on him, which basically means if another team wants to sign Gus Edwards, they not only have to pay him, but they have to give the Ravens a second-round pick. So Gus Edwards will be back with the Baltimore Ravens next season. But I don't know. I like J.K. Dobbins a lot, but I think I'm going to be lower than consensus on him this year. And I just don't think he's going to be the workhorse in this offense. And I think Gus Edwards is going to continue to have a big role. Fun fact, Gus Edwards is one of 2 players ever to start their career with 3 700-plus yard seasons and over 5 yards per carry. So they love this guy. He's a north and south runner. He's efficient. And he's a pretty good bet to get 700 more rushing yards or more in 2021. So because of the workload I expect for Gus Edwards, I just don't know that the ceiling is there for J.K. Dobbins, but I still have him as a high-end RB2 for 2021.
Gus Edwards is going to be really interesting in redraft leagues.
Sleeper.
Next year, he's going to be one of these guys. Hopefully people don't get too excited about him and his ADP gets inflated. But I could see him being a great piece that you can get a little bit later on, right? If you go running back, wide receiver, and then Gus Edwards is there.
Yeah, perfect bye-week running back.
Exactly. Because his role is going to go up. I mean, the fact that they were still getting Ingram phased out. But for Dobbins, I'm really not that concerned with Gus Edwards there either. I mean, we saw what happened in the back half of the year. But let's talk about the receiving work, because that's usually the big talking point around J.K. Dobbins is that, look, when he's in a backfield with Lamar Jackson, he's just not going to see that many targets, which is true to a degree, but I think that narrative is getting overblown at this point. J.K. Dobbins came into the league as a proven pass catcher. And he was used that way in the Ravens offense this year, even with Justice Hill coming in. And let's look at 2019 Mark Ingram, because that's the comp for, a Ravens running back is going to be an RB1. Mark Ingram, 2019, had 29 targets, caught 26 of them for 9.5 yards per reception, so super efficient. He had 10 touchdowns on the ground and had 5 through the air. So the 15 total touchdowns is really what got him to that RB1 status. 5 through the air, you don't see that much from any running back. But Dobbins in 2020 saw 24 targets, so only 5 less than 2019 Mark Ingram. Caught 18 of them, had 6.7 yards per reception, so definitely less efficient than Ingram was in his prime there in Baltimore. But Dobbins is a more electric pass catcher all the way around compared to Mark Ingram. Why can't Dobbins play the pass catching role full time next season? And if we're going to talk about touchdown upside, JK Dobbins had 7 touchdowns in the last 6 games he played in 2020. So that double-digit range is completely within his range of outcomes. He has that upside, that reasons why we like guys like Ronald Jones, who are just going to have the ability to get double-digit touchdowns because of the situation that they're in. And Dobbins was only on a 48% snap share as a rookie. We know what happened with Ingram. Essentially, Dobbins relegated him to the bench. And Dobbins' insane efficiency on 134 carries, which was 33rd among all running backs. Listen to this. Dobbins was number 1 in true yards per carry.
That's pretty
number
good.
3 in yards per touch. Number 1 in the league in breakaway run rate. Number 3 in the league in yards created per touch. And had a 30.9% juke rate, which was 5th in the league amongst all running backs. So the efficiency's there. We know that running backs, even Gus Edwards, right? You just talked about his efficiency. I think Dobbins is going to see that same efficiency because he's in that situation now in a larger role with no Ingram whatsoever. If I had to project 2021 JK Dobbins today, here's my projection. 192 carries, which is essentially 12 a game. So he was at 9.9 last season.
Mm-hmm.
So 192 carries a game. 1,100 rushing yards, so a slight dip in efficiency, but still hyper efficient. 1 or 2 catches per game, and that's the season we just saw from Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb in 2020 had 190 carries for 1,067 yards, 12 touchdowns, only 16 receptions, and then another 150 yards through the air. So over 1,200 yards from scrimmage, double-digit touchdowns, which was good for RB11 in PPR. That's an RB1. And I think the ceiling could even be higher for JK Dobbins on this Ravens offense that's still pumping out hyper-efficient, high fantasy scoring running backs, even with them having a quote-unquote down year last year where they went 11-5. Dobbins was still able to produce both for Dynasty and redraft. I'm in on Dobbins, man. There's not many running backs that have all the points going for them that Dobbins does.
It's tough because I feel like I agree with you, but then I also feel like I need to argue with you because the Nick Chubb stat line, it's a great comparison, but something to think about with that, something dangerous. That was in 12 games for Nick Chubb. So on the season, yeah, you want a guy who's healthy for all 16 games, but you're not going to get week in and week out what Nick Chubb was. You're going to get hypothetically 75% of it because he did only play 12 games in 2020. So regardless, great stat line. He would be an RB1. That's what you want. But I just worry about JK Dobbins. To me, like, the receiving it's not a pro. What we saw from Mark Ingram in the receiving game isn't a pro. He, less than 30 targets isn't a ton. That receiving efficiency for Mark Ingram, a guy who's not a receiving back, I think is more of an outlier than it is a pattern for what we're going to see in the Ravens offense. And Mark Ingram in 2019 caught a touchdown on 1 of every 5 receptions, which is just
it's crazy,
ridiculous. And to me, that's like throw that out the window because it's not repeatable. Maybe it's an outlier. Maybe J.K. Dobbins has an outlier like that in 2021, but that's not a pattern to me. So I'm looking at that as a negative. To me, we look at J.K. Dobbins last season, and yeah, the 2-ish targets a game were fine. If he can get that to 3 targets a game, turn it into 2 receptions, that might be 2 receptions for 15, 20 yards. And hopefully every several weeks, he turns one of those into a touchdown in the receiving game. But I am in on JK Dobbins, just not as high as the consensus. So for that reason, I feel like I'm not going to end up with a ton of shares in redraft because I like JK Dobbins as a mid to high end RB2. I just think in this Baltimore Ravens offense, Gus Edwards is going to be super involved. JK Dobbins isn't going to get the volume through the air. Sure, maybe he is efficient with it, but the volume's not going to be there. And Lamar Jackson's going to run as well. When you think about it, when the Ravens call a running play and it's a read option, there's a pretty good chance the running back's not even getting the ball. And yes, they run the ball way more than anyone else does in the league, but I just worry.
Number one by far.
Yeah, number one by far. But I just worry that J.K. Dobbins isn't going to be there from a volume perspective to have the upside that we want him to have. Now, if Gus Edwards gets injured, God forbid, or if he misses time, if J.K. Dobbins is truly getting 75, 80, 85% of the snaps, wheels up. But if he stays in that 50 to 60, even 65% of snaps, I think he could be that RB 10 to 12-ish range. But if he's not getting above 65% of snaps on any given week, I just don't know that the upside is there. And I know Mark Ingram's gone. He signed with Houston literally right before we started recording this. That's a story for another day. But no, who cares? But Ingram last season was like, he was already phased out of the offense. We saw from week 8 to 17, J.K. Dobbins was RB11, which is the upside I think we're really seeing out of him for 2021. But Mark Ingram only saw 2 carries a game over that stretch. He only played 10 snaps a game on the season. Mark Ingram played less snaps last season than Christian McCaffrey. So he was basically not on the field because CMC was healthy for, 2 games? So I already think Mark Ingram was phased out. The J.K. Dobbins we saw down the stretch when Ingram was a healthy scratch is going to be a similar type of workload we see in 2021. Now, not being a rookie, he should be more ingrained in the offense, gets a full off season, should develop as a player as well. So those are all things pointing in the right direction. So that's why I feel like I'm arguing against myself. I like J.K. Dobbins. I think he's right in that range of like that RB so 10 to 12, maybe 15 is kind of his downside. But I just think people going into next season for redraft. I just think going into next season, people are going to be all over him. He's going to be one of those guys, late first, early second rounds, probably drafted as a top 8 to 10 running back, which is like his biggest upside in my opinion. So I just think I'm going to end up being out on him. Now in Dynasty, I still love the guy. I think in Dynasty he's clear top 10 back because Gus Edwards is a guy that the Ravens certainly are committed to long term. J.K. Dobbins has a lot of tread left on his tires, and we know that they're going to keep running the ball with Lamar Jackson as the quarterback. So that's a little bit of a different story. But yeah, I'm high on Dobbins. I'm just not as high as everybody else.
Yeah, and I actually don't mind, low end RB1 as the redraft slot for JK Dobbins. But in Dynasty, I mean, he's creeping into my top 5 at this point.
Wow. So even that's higher than I would have him, but I get it. You kind of got to pick a side. If Gus Edwards wasn't there and he actually got the chance to play 75+% of snaps, 100% he's in that top 5. But I just don't know if the snap counts are going to be there, but we'll see this season. I mean, hopefully he gets that receiving work and gets on the field.
It's interesting to see the different sides when we talk to people, or what you see on Twitter is like, how much do you value player talent and ability versus situation? And when we talk about situation for J.K. Dobbins, we know it's a great situation as a runner. We just don't know it as a pass catcher. I lean to player talent and ability a little bit more than situation. Actually, a lot more, if I'm being honest. Because I think there's a chance that just based on the game changing, like whether that's the Ravens changing things, I don't think they're going to move away from Lamar Jackson, but things changing in the passing game, maybe they don't bring in an alpha wide receiver and they're going to need more help in the receiving game. Maybe we do see a bump for J.K. Dobbins. I'm fully in on his talent as a pass catcher, and that's another reason why I have him creeping into that top 5 as a dynasty running back. But it's an exciting time for this entire 2021 class. Anything else to add on Dobbins?
One last thing I have to point out. I'm on Fantasy Pros right now. Great resource just to kind of see if you're digging into stats, if you're looking into any kind of rankings. They do expert consensus rankings, which just gives you like a general narrative of the vibe. Like some people are going to be high, some people are going to be low, but it's kind of like a weighted average. And in Dynasty, as of now, expert consensus ranking, J.K. Dobbins is the RB10. So a little lower than you have him, probably right in line with where I have him from a Dynasty perspective. I know it's super early for redraft 2021, but I did want to pull up Dobbins ranking there as well. Right now, JK Dobbins is the RB 18 in expert consensus ranking for redraft. So that mid-tier RB2 to an upside of a high-end RB2 is actually right in line with where he is right now. So maybe in my mind, I thought other people were much, much higher on him. Maybe I'm too ingrained in the Dynasty talk right now. But I'm right in line with the expert consensus ranking per Fantasy Pros. I'm on J.K. Dobbins there as a mid-tier RB2. I wouldn't be surprised, though, as we get closer to the season to see that hype start to climb closer to that RB1 range. But just wanted to point out where the current ADPs are, kind of where the current rankings are for both a Dynasty and a redraft perspective, because context is always super important. And look, I wasn't as far off as I thought on Dobbins.
Yeah, man. Once we get some ADPs and we get closer to redraft season, we'll be able to talk, in that context of, hey, we're not talking bad about a player. We're talking bad about their ADP. But I'm all aboard that Dobbins hype train. Let's talk about another piece of news, talking about some of the franchise tags, the restricted free agent moves with some tenders and all of that. Chris Godwin has now been franchise tagged, is made official. For what it's worth, not trying to toot my own horn, but I am tooting my own horn. I did say that he was going to get franchise tagged. You heard it here first. So, Alex, I don't know how good it feels for you being on a podcast with essentially the next Adam Schefter, but
I'm honored.
What's your value right now for Chris Godwin?
Yeah, if we're talking Dynasty, I mean, Tampa Bay is a great spot for him to be. He gets Tom Brady for an extra year. It sounds like the narrative right now is this is temporary. They franchise tagged him so that they can come to terms on a longer-term deal. So if you're Chris Godwin, this is great. You're in Tampa. You're with the GOAT. You're clearly one of the alphas in this offense. The Mike Evans-Chris Godwin combo has been fantastic. I know Godwin disappointed a lot of people in 2020 because he was in and out, kind of off the field in a lot of situations, but we know the talent of this guy. So I think this is great news for Chris Godwin. One thing you always like to see in Dynasty fantasy football when you have these good assets is just continuity. Change isn't always good. I know last year DeAndre Hopkins was kind of a push. He was a stud in Houston. But with a guy like Stephon Diggs, we saw a rise in value with change. Sometimes with quarterbacks, you can see that as well. But if you have an asset that's producing, you just want the status quo. You don't want to mix it up because you want what you have. And so for Chris Godwin and for Dynasty managers, I think it's great news. If they do lock him up on a long-term deal, that's fantastic news as well, because it looks like Tom Brady is going to play for a couple more seasons at this rate. So if you can get Chris Godwin tied to Tom Brady for a couple more seasons while he is in his prime, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, man. Well, I have Godwin on the cusp of a wide receiver one in Dynasty.
I'm with you.
Awesome. Wow. An agreement. Let's go.
It took 32 minutes, but we made it.
Chris Godwin just turned 25 years old. Mike Evans about to turn 28. He will be by the time the season starts. He's past the age apex. We've seen injuries get a hold of Evans before, and Godwin's 2020 was kind of a wash too, dealing with his own injuries. We know the passing volume is going to be there. We know the offense is going to be good. So I don't mind. I thought last year Chris Godwin was going a little bit too high in redraft. Really didn't have him in many places. His dynasty stock, if you can buy him low in any way, I absolutely would. If you're looking at that 2020.
Steph, Chris Godwin or Allen Robinson in Dynasty right now?
Oh, that's Chris Godwin pretty easily for me.
I think so as well, just with the question marks that Allen Robinson has at the quarterback spot. Now, hypothetical situation, if Russell Wilson is to be traded to the Chicago Bears, does that change that answer?
Haven't done the projections yet, but it might, man. it might.
Might make it close, but
that'd be insane.
I mean, Allen Robinson, let's talk about him in terms of franchise tags, because he was tagged as a Colts fan. Godwin and Allen Robinson are two of the guys I wanted the Colts to sign, and two of the probably the best two wide receivers on this free agency class. Kenny Golladay is in there as well in the mix, but Allen Robinson franchise tagged as well. He's going to stay in Chicago. Question marks at the quarterback spot. What do you think this means for his dynasty value? Because with Chris Godwin, it's like, franchise tag, status quo, keep the continuity, all good. With Allen Robinson, yes, he stays in Chicago, but who's going to play quarterback this season? What does this mean for A-Rob?
Yeah, it means, the only thing that really brings him down dynasty-wise is his age. We know the situation's fine. Allen Robinson's never had a great QB. That's always the narrative when you're talking about A-Rob. Next year,
True.
you could essentially start, like you conceivably start a redraft league going Derrick Henry in the first, DeAndre Swift in the second, and then Chris Godwin or Allen Robinson in the third. I would go Godwin there just because of the quarterback play. But both of these guys, for me in redraft, Allen Robinson doesn't change at all. In Dynasty, just the age is the only thing. Like I think we all agree the production is going to be there. He's a guy that's just proven he can create separation. He doesn't need to be a pure burner to get open, to command targets. The target volume is going to be there, whether it's Trubisky, whether it's Nick Foles, whoever it is, they're going to pepper Allen Robinson with targets, and Allen Robinson's going to bring a lot of them down. Maybe the yards after the catch, some of the big explosive plays start to diminish from A-Rob as he does get a little bit older, but that really wasn't what we were depending on for his fantasy value anyways. So it really doesn't change that much for me. Now, if Russell Wilson, let's talk through this, right?
The rumors are flying, Steph. The rumors are flying.
Let's just play this game out. So Russell Wilson, let's talk about him. If he comes to Chicago, does it really change that much for you?
It does.
With his dynasty value.
It does. It has to give him a little uptick, right? Because I was going to ask you, one, who's the quarterback going to be for Chicago? And two, for Allen Robinson, does it matter? Because we've seen Nick Foles, we've seen Mitch Trubisky, we've seen Blake Bortles, we've seen other scrubs as well. To me, whether it's Trubisky, whether, Jameis Winston, I think would actually be an upgrade in a fantasy football perspective, whether it's a rookie, I don't think it matters. But what could matter is if it's a clear upgrade. Like if the quarterback sucks, I think A-Rob's going to be fine. But if you get Jameis Winston from a volume perspective, or if you get Russell Wilson from an efficiency perspective, and half the reason Russell wants to leave is it's the offensive line, but he also wants to chuck the ball potentially 600 times a year. So if Russell Wilson gets traded to Chicago, they're throwing the ball. They're letting Russ cook. So I think if Russell Wilson does get traded to the Bears, and it's all speculation at this point, it's got to be an uptick for Allen Robinson's redraft, and especially redraft. He'll fly.
Yeah.
The hype will get out of control in redraft, but in Dynasty, I think it has to be an uptick because if they trade for us, you almost expect him to be there for the rest of Allen Robinson's prime career. And being tied to that quarterback, we've seen what it's done for a guy like DK Metcalf. We've seen what it's done for a guy like Tyler Lockett. A-Rob's produced with scrubs. If he gets Russell Wilson, I think the targets could go up, and I think that catch rate's going to go up as well. So it's only good things for Allen Robinson. I don't think the quarterback can bring his value down, but I think it can certainly bring it up.
And for Russell Wilson, not many receiving cores are going to rival DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett as your 1 and 2 there. But, Allen Robinson's at that level. We could just – I know not from their dynasty value because DK is a lot younger and there's plenty of upside there and he's really exciting. But, statistically, let's just say those two guys are a push. And then it's Tyler Lockett compared to Darnell Mooney. Obviously, we're going to take Lockett there. But I think Mooney's an interesting name with some upside. If Russell Wilson lands there, it's wheels up for Darnell Mooney. Oh, my goodness. I could even see them bringing somebody in, Anthony Miller and Javon Wims, both hitting the market presumably this year. So I could see them going and getting a wide receiver in the draft, Darnell Mooney being a 5th-round pick. But last year, the Bears were top 10 in pass plays per game. Trubisky was throwing the ball when he was a starter about 30 times a game. So if you give that to Russell Wilson, that's pretty much what he saw this year, actually a little bit higher. So, whether it's the volume, the efficiency, whatever it is, the situation's very similar. Teams that probably want to be run first, but for whatever reason, whether it's poor offensive line play, it's they get behind in games, whatever it is, they're going to end up passing more than they want. So for Russell Wilson, he's pretty much situation proof, whether it's Seattle or the Bears. But I really don't see that happening. I don't see how you move off of Russell Wilson. If I'm the Seahawks GM, I'm firing Pete Carroll before I let Russell Wilson go.
I'm firing myself before I let Russell Wilson go.
And with just like Tom Brady, right? When you're a proven stud quarterback in the NFL, you get so much say in whether it's the playbook and scheme, whether it's the personnel that's being brought in. Imagine Russell Wilson coming into Chicago, everyone knowing he's the guy and we're going to bend to his will because we had to give up all of our draft capital for the next decade to get him. They're going to listen to what he says, which it seems like that's really the problem right now in Seattle.
So, Steph, before we sign off today, have to let the people know about something we've been working on in the lab.
Yes.
We are coming out with a DMS, Double Move Sports newsletter. The link is in the description below. Super simple. Just plug in your email and you're going to start getting that newsletter. It's not going to spam you. Don't worry. But it's just something we want to put out as a different form of content. Maybe you don't have time to hop on every single time we come out with a podcast and watch an hour-long YouTube video. So we want to come out with some quick hitting facts. We're going to release what we talk about on the show, some other cool content as well in written form. It's going to come straight to your email, and we're really excited about it. A lot of times it is going to align with the podcast, so if you see something you like there, you can click in and watch the full show as well. So sign up in that link below. We're going to be doing it all season long, just bringing you guys value. We want to win Dynasty leagues, win redraft leagues, and continue to bring some fire NFL content as well. So that's just another way we can do that and provide value for you guys. So please sign up. We're super excited to get this thing off the ground. And we're going to start cranking with it here very, very soon, potentially as early as next week. So
let's go.
Be sure you sign up. Let's go.
Let's go. A like and a sub, always appreciated if you're listening on YouTube. Don't forget you can listen to us on the go on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. Just look up Double Move Sports. And we'll see y'all next time. Appreciate y'all listening and watching. Peace.
Peace.